Good afternoon, Huskies, and welcome to the final installment of our Elevate Career Hacks online professional development workshops. My name is Joshua Prue, and I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement here at the Office of Alumni Relations, and I'm going to be your host today. On behalf of the UConn Foundation, we're excited for today's discussion. Today's presentation will feature one of UConn's most outstanding faculty members from our School of Fine Arts. We are thrilled to welcome Constance Devereaux, Associate Professor in Residence and Director of the MFA Arts Leadership and Cultural Management Program here at UConn. But before we get started, just a few areas of note for help you managing your webinar participation today. The first is that there will be an opportunity to ask questions and participate by typing any of your questions or responses into the question box on your control panel. Feel free to type these in as you think of any, and we will do our best to get to all of them at the end of the session. Second, a survey will be sent to you at the conclusion of this webinar. We appreciate that you take some time to actually fill out that webinar and provide us some details and also other topics that you might be interested in for future enhancement or for your career programs. The webinar finally will be recorded, so please visit our YouTube page sometime later this week to review this presentation. You can reach that at youtube.com/UConnAlumni. And without further ado, I want to introduce our presenter. Constance Devereaux is an Associate Professor in Residence and Director of the Master of Fine Arts program, Arts and Leadership and Cultural Management program here at UConn. Her career as an arts leader and a professor of arts leadership has spanned more than 2 decades. She's a frequent lecturer internationally on leadership and governance of arts organizations and of educating tomorrow's arts leaders. She has provided guest lectures in countries in Europe, Asia, Africa, and North America. She was the first person to have served as an arts leadership expert for the U.S. Fulbright Senior Specialist Program, where she provided expertise to universities and arts organizations in South Africa, Finland, and Romania. Before her tenure began here at UConn, she held a temporary appointment as the Vice Rector for Internationalization at Karaganda State Technical University in the Republic of Kazakhstan at the invitation of the Ministry of Science and Education. And during her tenure, she increased the international profile of the university and raised its ratings in the Central Asia region. Constance is a member of the International Research Team, UNESCO, and the Making of Global Cultural Policy funded by the Australian Research Council, and the Research Cluster on Arts Production and Cultural Policy and Transformation, which was established at Zeppelin University in Germany. As an independent consultant, she also advises organizations on issues of leadership, governance, strategic management, and policy. She has published articles in the Journal of Cultural Management and Policy, the Annals of Tourism, Journal of Arts Management, Law and Society, Cultural Sporai, and Philosophia. Her books, Arts and Cultural Management, Sense and Sensibilities in the State of the Field, and the Arts Management Handbook, New Directions for Students and Practitioners, are widely used internationally. Constance, quite a background, and we're thrilled to have you. I know that you're coming live from Germany right now as you're getting set for another one of your international consultant work. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Joshua, and thank you very much to UConn Foundation for inviting me to speak with you today, and to all of you who are joining during your lunch break to take part in my presentation. Indeed, I am in Germany. I was telling Joshua I'm here on Lake Constance, which I think is fantastic since my name is Constance. So one thing that I want to add to my bio is that I earned my PhD in philosophy and political science, both of which inform me a great deal in designing training for individuals in leadership and management of organizations. I think it fits in well with what we're talking about today to understand that approach, because it's important for me to figure out how to get students to learn well enough in the classroom in order to perform effectively on the job out in the world, and also to help organizational leaders acquire the acumen they need for effective action. So that theme of the webinar series, Career Hacks, the reason I like it is because when I do lectures to working professionals like yourselves, I like to make sure that they're going to walk away with something they can readily implement, even if it's only in a small way. So a new way of thinking, a new way of approaching something. The core of my presentation today is something I've developed for working with organizations in the area of leadership development, strategic and long-term planning, goal setting, and similar areas. And I've used it both in the classroom and with a variety of organizations. So I've seen it work, and I hope that you'll take something useful from it today. But first, let me give you a bit of background. I decided to talk about visionary leadership because I think it's increasingly a problem in organizational management. Okay, I'm already running into technical problems with trying to switch my slides, so bear with me one moment, because it doesn't seem to be switching. There we go. Okay, so as I was saying, I decided to talk about visionary leadership because I think it's increasingly a problem in organizational management. The idea that we need visionary leaders to transform the business landscape. So I want to share two stories to give you an idea of what I think about so-called visionary leadership. The first is about a dean I worked with many years ago at a university that's going to remain nameless. But the dean in question saw himself as a visionary leader. In fact, I have proof of that because if you found him on LinkedIn, you would see that underneath his photo, where you're supposed to put your current job title, he had visionary leader. Among the faculty, we used to joke that he probably woke up every night in the middle of the night with some brilliant idea and couldn't wait to get to work so he could assign it to someone. In fact, I used to get phone calls from him, thankfully not in the middle of the night, but sometimes on weekends or during the summer when I was away on vacation, so that he could tell me about his latest idea for my department. Well, the problem was that maybe some of his ideas were actually good, but he was so busy having ideas that he didn't have time to talk to us about whether the ideas were actually needed. He left out a key step in leadership, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The other story is about the charismatic leader of a large performing arts center in Washington, D.C., which will also remain nameless. He became quite famous for his leadership acumen and his innovative programming. I happen to know some members of his staff, and the backstory that they gave me was that his innovative ideas were often quite costly in the way that he conceived them, and entailed lots of unpaid overtime by his staff, which of course bred a lot of resentment. He didn't have time to talk about how his ideas could be implemented. He just made it the staff's responsibility to get things done. So these two examples actually occurred very close in time and led me to start thinking a lot about leadership. Much of what we hear about leadership is a rather idealized view, leaders as visionaries. But it seems to me that having visions in the sense of coming up with great ideas or innovative, creative solutions may not be that unusual. In fact, my photo here of the Red Queen, the Queen of Hearts in Alice of Wonderland, shows you that people can have, great ideas all the time, very frequently, but maybe they don't always lead somewhere. And in fact, if you think about it, if somebody goes around claiming to have visions, we often think that they're rather suspect. So it's not always commendable to be visionary. Rather, I think what is commendable is bringing a vision to fruition, the successful implementation of the vision. So it's okay to aspire to greatness, but getting there is always going to take concrete steps. One of the reasons I included the Queen of Hearts in my presentation is because I think the quote there, sometimes I believe many 6 impossible things to do for breakfast, speaks a lot to what I call leadership hype. We're meant to laugh at the Queen because it's impossible to believe in impossible things. And here's the philosopher part of me who's saying that. Impossible, by definition, means that it isn't and can never be possible. Of course, we can be innovative, creative, push the envelope, think outside of the box, but whatever we come up with still has to be possible. A leader isn't the person who makes the impossible possible. Instead, it's the person who figures out how to make it possible to accomplish something, to take good ideas and bring them to fruition. The reason I like to include this quote is because I think it aligns well with other hyperbolic notions on leadership, statements that sound good, but that may not mean much. So let's take a look at some of them. A lot of the hype around leadership has to do with differentiating leadership from management. And many of you are probably familiar with this. There's a lot of books and podcasts and websites differentiating between the two. And you see that leadership is equated with what's good and management with what's not so good. And often, sometimes management is equated with what's bad or what's wrong to do. So here are a few quotes that illustrate the idea. The first one, by a contributing writer to Forbes back in 2013, says, leaders can make several important decisions about an issue in the time it takes others to understand the question. So I like to use this quote in class, and I ask students if they were going to establish the truth of that statement, how they would go about doing it. Because really you can't. What you would have to do is take a group of people and designate, or try to differentiate between which are leaders and which are managers, or leaders and other people, and assuming you could even do that reliably, and then get your stuff out and ask the leaders a question at the same time that you ask other people a question, and then time they're able to make several important decisions while the others are still trying to understand the question. So it's a bit ridiculous to make such a statement. Obviously, it's supposed to be motivational, but I think that statements like this, because they're motivational without anything undergirding them, can actually be quite problematic. The second quote here says that leaders create a vision, managers create goals. And I wonder what really are wrong, I wonder what's really wrong with goals and why you would make a statement like that. Because not having goals is like trying to hit a target with the ready, fire, aim approach. You'll hit something, but maybe not what you intend. And then the last quote here says, managers are controllers and think with their brains, but leaders are passionate and think with their hearts too, alongside their brains. Leaders know the importance of the gut feeling and believe in their sixth senses. Probably both managers and leaders think with their minds and emotions, because both managers and leaders are human beings, and all human beings use both reason and emotion as part of decision making. So the hype is there, again, probably to be motivational, but it doesn't really seem to be very helpful about what you're supposed to do. On the other hand, there are people who look at leadership in a more measured way and are somewhat askance of the whole idea of visionary leadership. So George Edwards, a political scientist, says, there's a notion that there are transformational leaders who can create opportunities for change because of their quality of leadership, essentially by getting out in front of the crowd and crying, follow me. In reality, that rarely happens. So if you think about it, people aren't always ready to follow until you tell them where you're going to take them and why. So if you walk up to a group of people and say, hey, follow me, probably the first question they ask is, where are we going? The next quote by Dawn Nicole Baldwin, who's a brand strategist, says that visionary leaders can be victims of a flavor of the month mentality, chasing after the next new shiny idea without really counting the cost. And then Dave Levinsky, who writes on leadership, says that vision in business requires that you clearly see where you choose to be in the future and formulate the necessary steps to get your organization there. So what those quotes indicate is that this idea of visionary leadership needs something added, which is the concrete steps to take you from vision to the goal. And I want to just share a few more quotes to keep in mind as we continue to go through this. Robert Sutton, who's a manager professor at Stanford, says that the best leaders do something that might properly be called a mix of leadership and management. So there you go, understanding that it takes a little bit of both of the qualities of both. And again, since I'm a philosopher, I couldn't resist throwing in Aristotle, who said, we are what we repeatedly do. excellence then is not an act, but a habit. So it's the habit of setting a direction and then the concrete goals that are going to lead to it. And Mark Twain, who says, you can't depend on your eyes when your imagination is out of focus. So the idea there is that we can use our imagination to come up with all kinds of wonderful ideas, but we have to be clearly focused if we're going to achieve those goals. So these are a lot of difference about leadership. What I want you to keep this a little bit in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation. So instead of visionary leaders, we need people who can translate visionary thinking into sets of goals and objectives that others can understand and follow. We need to identify problems clearly and conceptualize multiple possible solutions, select the best solution for a given set of circumstances, and articulate clear, concrete steps that lead to the best solution. We also need people who can explain why the solution is best for the given context and what the solution, if carried out, achieves concretely for the organization, and then help others see how the steps and solution align with organizational values and beliefs. So why values? Why are they part of that? Dina Dwyer Owens, who wrote Values Inc., says that the bottom line, and a profitable one too, is that a company that lives and leads with values will always outperform, outshine, outdo, and outlive competitors. And that's actually been proven quite a few times through research. For example, researchers who've looked at the top leaders in various organizations, in for-profit and nonprofit companies, have found that executive values have a direct and significant impact on organizational performance, whereas age, tenure, functional experience, and level of education do not. So that's actually kind of surprising. The researcher that I note there was looking at something called upper echelons theory. And this has been established over and over again, that the values are a better predictor of the organizational performance than all of these other things that are listed there. And then this is from me, that values arise from our beliefs about the world, in part from how we define what we think is wrong with it, what needs to be fixed. So that's the crux of where we're going in the remainder of the leadership. The remainder of the presentation. So I'm going to pause a little bit in what we're talking about just to do a little exercise with you, because if we're talking about how to go from values into concrete leadership, the whole point of it is that you're solving problems for the organization. So I'm sure that many of you already know that problem definition can itself be very complex, because in an organization, we don't always agree on what the problem is in any given situation. Problems can be hidden, so not immediately apparent. But one of the issues that I encounter a lot in my work is that problems are sometimes embedded in solutions. In other words, that when you ask people to identify a problem they need to solve, they give you the solution as part of the problem. In fact, this is really common. So here you see a list of statements. Now, because I teach arts and cultural management, the statements all have to do with that field, but I think that you'll be able to apply it to your own situation no matter what sector you work in. And what I'd like you to do as we read them together is to decide if the statement is giving just a problem, or is there a solution embedded in the problem. So you can do this, take notes on your own, or if you'd like, you can use the questions tool and you can type in your responses as we go. I don't have time to actually address any of your responses right now, but it would be great to be able to get them anyway and take a look at them to see how you responded. And I think Joshua is going to be providing you with my contact information, so you can also contact me after the presentation if you want some feedback. But let's go through these together, and I'll be giving the answers right away so that we can move through them. So the first one says that children in your town need more exposure to the arts. So hopefully you guessed that that has the solution embedded in it. In fact, we're not even sure what the problem is here, but we know that whatever it is, whoever's making this statement thinks that exposure to the arts will solve it. If you compare it to the next statement, children in your town have nothing to do after school, I hope you can see that the second statement is really just a problem. So children have nothing to do after school, and there are multiple possible solutions. One could be that they need some arts activities. Another could be maybe sports activities, or doing math, or learning a job. There are a variety of solutions to the problem of having nothing to do after school. Exposure to the arts is just one of them. The third one says, artists in our town need to sell more of their work. So that's rather similar to the first one. Again, the solution is already embedded in the statement of the problem, and we're not sure what the problem is here because it's not clearly stated. Moving to number 4, it says, without opportunities to perform, our local musicians will have to move elsewhere. So I hope you're catching on, because here again, we see that the solution, opportunities to perform, is embedded in the problem of musicians moving away. Number 5 says, our museum lacks space for putting on a public lecture series for senior citizens. So once again, we have a solution that's embedded in the problem, because lacking space doesn't mean that you can't put on a lecture series. You could do it like we're doing right now. I'm sitting in a hotel room, you're comfortably sitting at your workplace, and we're having a public lecture. So we don't need a physical space in order to do it. The 6th one says, many elderly people lack opportunities to improve their health and mental well-being. That one is just a problem. It doesn't have a solution embedded in it. And the final one says, lack of arts activities leads to decreased health and mental well-being in the elderly. And if you guessed that this one is a solution embedded in the problem, you'd be right. So why is that a problem? Just to sum up, the issue with embedding the solution into identifying a problem is that it doesn't really allow you to envision a solution beyond the one that you've already articulated. And it's hard for people to break out of that framing of the problem with a solution already provided in order to think of something more innovative. So what we want to do then is to imagine a situation where you've successfully identified a problem within your organization that you want to solve. And remember, we talked about the notion of values being connected to this. So, sorry, I just am sipping water. I don't know if you can hear that in the background. I'm sort of conscious now of you not being able to see me and what I'm doing. Okay, so imagine that you have finally identified a problem, as this group of people that we're going to talk about has done. So in this situation, we have a group that has identified the problem that they live in an area with a high number of non-native English speakers. This poses a problem when the children enter school because they don't speak English well, or sometimes not at all, and they may perform poorly in their school assignments. So they've identified a problem and they need to find a solution. So one thing you can do is to do research on several possible solutions. And in this case, the group has found evidence that teaching children to sing in English can help them with language acquisition. So before we move to the next slide, I want to point out that because values are important in the leadership mix, as we've just discussed earlier, we want to be upfront about them. And how can we do that? Well, in the nonprofit world, we're used to mission statements. And actually, they came originally from the for-profit world. Creating mission statements was a way to get buy-in from the public into the values of an organization. And then it was carried over into the nonprofit world. But I'm going to talk about mission statement may be very different than you've seen it before. I do it in a way that's a little bit different. It's not a model that I came up with on my own. Years ago, when I was exploring teaching leadership and looking into this, I read a series of books by an organization that was called the National Association of Fundraising Professionals. They've since changed their name, but back when they had that name, they had put out this series of books on things like mission statements and et cetera. And so the way that I do mission statements is very similar to what they do. And I wanted to see if it would really work and it would really be helpful to organizations. So I've tested this a lot. And as I said earlier, at the beginning of my presentation, I've seen it work very well and people adopt it and have great effect. So at the end of my presentation, I'm going to invite you to try formulating your own if you like, and I'll be able to comment on just a few of them. But one of the most common issues that comes up in nonprofit leadership, and many of you probably know this, is how to translate the mission into action in order to address problems that the organization confronts. There's a common misperception that mission statement is the same as a purpose statement. In fact, the mission statement is supposed to explain why you exist. Philosophically, it's about identifying a problem in the world that you believe you can solve through the actions you take. Now, as I said, that's not just the case with nonprofit organizations. All organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, governmental organizations, they all exist for a reason, and the reason is to solve some problem in the world. For example, why does a company make toothbrushes? To alleviate tooth decay. Why does a company make cars? So people can get to the grocery store quicker and carry groceries home, or so they can go to the beach when they live far away from the beach. And of course, there are other reasons for making cars and toothbrushes and other products, but the way that you answer that, or the reasons that you provide, are different ways that you frame your organization and can result in different actions that you take. So that's why it's important to make sure there's a connection between how you see the world and how you frame your actions, which you can embody in the mission statement. So again, we see this organization that has identified a problem, the one that I'm showing on the screen right now, this group of people who has identified a problem, and they did some research and they found that singing seems to work to help non-native English speakers acquire better English speaking skills. So this organization needs a mission statement. Again, as we said, non-native English speaking children are likely to do poorly in school. The solution is to provide a fun, arts-based and proven means for them to learn English. The organizational belief is that music overcomes educational borders. So let me pause there, because why that belief, which is a mission statement. So music overcomes educational borders is the mission statement they've adopted. Now, unbeknownst to you, here in the hotel I'm staying at in Germany, I met with this group and I had a discussion with them about their values and beliefs. So when I'm working with a group, that's one of the first things I do. I gather them together and I ask them to think about the core beliefs of the organization. You might think this would take forever. If you've ever worked with a group on mission statements, maybe you've had the experience that it takes forever. Nobody ever agrees. You argue about commas and word placement. But in fact, when I do the exercise on mission statements with organizations, it doesn't take that long. because I begin with this notion of values and beliefs. So if you work for an organization for any length of time, you've absorbed in some way what the core values are for that organization. And I find that when I do this exercise with people, they're quickly able to throw out what things they believe in. As people begin to articulate it, others in the group recognize which values are core. And so I think the longest I've ever spent on this exercise before a group has come up with their statement is about 20 minutes. And that's with a larger group of, let's say, like 30 or 40 people. It typically doesn't take longer than that. And once they come to the statement that seems to resonate with people afterwards. So I think that's kind of exciting. So as I said, that I met with in the hotel came up with this belief: music overcomes educational borders. So one thing to note is that while the belief alludes to what the organization does, it doesn't say it explicitly. And that's important because, again, the mission statement is not what you do in the world, it's what you believe about the world. So the group, which now adopted the name United Children's Choir, believes that music overcomes educational borders. What do we want to know about this? First of all, it's a statement, not a group of statements. A mission statement should just be a statement, not a paragraph and not a volume and not a set of volumes, as often happens. Again, it doesn't state what the group does, it states what they believe. It's not a purpose statement. Now, grammatically, sometimes people have a problem with mission statements the way that I formulate them, because it should, in their mind, it should be our mission is to, just like our purpose is to, but in fact, that's not the way that this works. Again, it's a statement of your beliefs. It's simple, concise, easy to remember and repeat. So if I covered it up, you could probably still remember exactly what that mission statement is, even though it's not from your organization. It's also easy for others to agree with. Conversely, it's difficult to disagree with. So even if someone doesn't really like music or kids, or feel that non-native English-speaking children should have opportunities like this, they would probably agree that music can overcome educational borders. So why do you need something like this? Well, your organization needs a mission statement like this in order to understand why it does what it does, but also to explain it to others. People really do resonate with people speaking their beliefs. And when you express your belief to, say, your investors or donors or constituents or customers or patrons, or whoever it is that has an interest in your organization, you engender support for what you do. The other part of this is that it connects logically to actions. So actions tied to values. The actions the organization takes should be logically connected to the mission. These are formulated as goals and objectives that can change over time. And goals and objectives are two distinct things. I often hear people say goals and objectives really fast, as if it's all one word, and don't make that distinction. But goals are actually aspirational and overarching, and objectives are the concrete actions that you're going to take. So let's see how this would all work together. Again, Arts United Choir believes that music overcomes educational borders. Our goal is to erase educational borders impeding student success. And our objective is to hold 2 singing classes weekly in 2020 for 50 non-native English-speaking children in our community in order to improve their English skills. So let's pause a moment to think about that. Because at the beginning, I was saying that, visionary leadership often doesn't lead to concrete action. People are left wondering what they're supposed to do to bring that vision to fruition. And here we can see that we have this belief statement that logically connects down to an objective. And if any of you are in project management, perhaps you recognize that my objective is SMART, S-M-A-R-T, right? It's specific, measurable, achievable, result-oriented, time-specific. And you could take this objective and give it to somebody to flesh out a little bit in order to achieve what you want achieved. So what do we have here? 2 singing classes weekly. Okay, so then we need rooms, and we need somebody to teach the classes, and we need some music to sing from, and maybe some instruments. Our benchmark is going to be 50 non-native English-speaking children in our community. So we'll know where to look for the children. We'll know how many we want to have in order to declare success. And it also says what the outcome will be in order to improve their English skills. So presumably then we're also providing singing lessons in English, songs in English, not some other language, so we can achieve our goal. So that way we've connected them all together once again so that we can get to the concrete goal from the statement of belief. So just a quick review of that. The leader who can lead with values will be more successful. I gave you just a few quotes on that, but there is quite a bit of evidence that that's the case. If you can find your core belief in your organization, you can frame your mission around it. Mission leads to goals and objectives that are logically connected. Goals are more aspirational than objectives, and objectives are concrete and lead to implementable actions. You should also frame your objectives around things that are possible rather than impossible. So we can check by comparing these 2 organizations. Organization 1, for example, says, our objective is to be the best at providing enriching theater experiences to the widest possible audience based on principles of inclusivity and diversity. And while that sounds really great, again, it doesn't tell us how we're going to achieve it. So organization 2 says, our objectives are to increase the diversity of our audiences by 50% in 2020, adopt policies mandating inclusivity and diversity in all hiring in all departments no later than December 15, 2020, and increase repeat attendance at our performances by 30% in 2020. So it should be obvious to you which organization is more likely to be able to achieve what it wants to achieve. And the objectives are really the same. They're just framed very and express our values. But in the end, if we don't give the concrete steps to achieve them, it's not, we're not certain whether we're going to actually be able to achieve them. And again, by providing that mission statement at the beginning, we're able to convey to others and ourselves why we are doing what we're doing and engendering support for what we do. So I invite you to give it a try. The example was Arts United Choir believes that music overcomes educational borders. Think about what the core belief is in your organization. Can you craft it into a short statement centered on the core belief? So I invite you to use the question tool, and if you have some thoughts about how you might craft some similar mission statement, as I said, I'd have time to maybe talk about 2 of them and give you some pointers. But to conclude, leadership is visionary in that it is about future thinking, the ability to envision a point in the future where you would like to be and to take the necessary steps to achieve it. That's what visionary leadership is about. It's also the capacity to imagine something that doesn't yet exist and organize the steps, resources, and staff that bring it into being. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much. So if you want to share your mission statements, again, Josh was going to take maybe just 2 of them to share with me. And then, of course, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you so much for your time. It was a real pleasure to be able to present this to you.
Thank you very much, Constance. Greatly appreciate that. And as we discussed, if you have any questions or if you have any or would like to potentially submit your mission statement for Constance to review, you can use your questions toolbar, which is on the right-hand side. Go ahead and type those in at this time, and we'll take some of those as they come through. Constance, one quick question for you. How did you get into this work at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting that most people who go into arts management even today seem to do it a little bit accidentally, and it was that way for me. I was going quite a different direction in my academic career, as I said at the beginning, in philosophy and political science, and I taught both of those, but my real interest was in public policy and using philosophy as a critique of contemporary public policy. But even though I was very fortunate to have a scholarship for the university I went to, it ended automatically when I was done with my coursework, and I had to get a real job, and took a job leading a regional arts organization. And I realized at the time that there was a lot of dysfunction in the way that that arts organizations operate as nonprofits, and then discovered that it was that way in nonprofits, and that it's rather the case in for-profits too. That a lot of what we do as say leaders or managers, doesn't really account for what happens on the job. And so when I realized that there was this need, I actually started to look into it a lot more deeply, and then thought about how I could craft this into teaching in the field. There are still not that many programs in the whole world that do arts and cultural management as a degree program at the university level. And so there was the opportunity to get in and really kind of craft a lot of the, what is the thinking, what is the pedagogy, how does this translate into real world action? So I've been very active in the field in doing that. I've created several arts and cultural management programs in the US and abroad. So that's basically how I got into it.
Absolutely fascinating, and thank you very much for sharing that. We did get two questions. At this time, we did not see a mission statement come in, but there are two questions here. The first is, how do you know the difference between a visionary idea and just another run-of-the-mill idea?
Yeah, that is a great question, isn't it? I mean, I think that visionary, again, it's kind of hyperbolic language. And we tend to speak these days sort of in hyperbole in ways. Just to switch it a little bit, one of my pet peeves is the concept of best practices. You hear it all the time. So we want to have best practices. Of course we do, but best means that it's at the top, right? It's better than all the other practices out there. But how could you possibly know that the one that you're doing is the best one? So I think good practices rather than best practices is a good enough expression, right? So we should all champion good practices and make sure that the practices that we have are good, but we don't always have to go for the best ones. In the objectives I laid out with organization 1 and 2, you may remember that the first said that they want to be the best in what they do. And that's great to aim to be the best, but I think if you just aim to be really good at what you do, then it doesn't matter whether you're the best at it for most of the things that we do. If there's another organization that, like, they're doing their jobs really well and you're doing your job really well, I don't think we need to contend for who's the best one at doing it. So with visionary, I think the similarity is that, if an idea translates into something good for your organization, if you want to call it visionary, that's great. But maybe it's just a good idea that translates into something really good for your organization and its intended goal.
Thank you for that. And looks like the last question we have at this moment, is there a way to form a mission statement related to a specific role within a company rather than the company itself? Because obviously some people can only control certain aspects within their specific roles, or is that just a waste of time to be considering it?
I don't think it is a waste of time. So I do, I teach project management in my program, also teach project management skills to out in the field. Now, in the kind of projects we're talking about are, there's a field in project management where people are, building bridges or skyscrapers. The principles are kind of the same, but way scaled down. So if you go through the steps of project management, the recommendation is that you formulate a mission statement for the particular project. So I think you can do that for a project that you're working on. You can do it for the unit that you are working in. I think really the idea here is to have the core values that are the reason that you exist in the first place. As I've tried to indicate, by having that in your, as the beginning point, you can always go back and measure what you're doing against it. So when you have your mission statement, goals, and objectives all logically connected, that's the way that you measure whether the objective really resonates back to the value that you've articulated. And I think that people really appreciate when you values to them when they're working with you in some talking about a nonprofit organizations. One of the skills that I teach my students is grant writing, for instance. So if you were to start a grant by saying, we're requesting $50,000 to build a new facility for teaching children English language skills. Our mission is that we believe music overcomes educational borders. For that reason, we are creating programs that teach, so I could go on with that, but how you can string together those students in a presentation with somebody and immediately be able to get how those link up. So I think that it can be very powerful, as I said earlier, connect people to what you're doing and to gain their buy-in.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think that's the majority that we've seen at this point come through. I think given the time that we've had, I think that's all the questions that'll be coming through at this point. So Constance, again, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you must be a little jet lagged from your travel. Thank you so much for, obviously, in the midst of all your meetings and everything, taking a few minutes here today to chat with everybody. And to everybody that joined us, thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you next season as we ramp up our next set of career hacks. Constance, safe travels and the best for all your meetings.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.